Hello, my name is Bob Tiede, and I'm the co-author of Leading with Questions, co-authored with Dr. Michael McQuart. The best advice I've ever received is that a leader who leads with questions will often be 3 to 10 times more effective than a leader who simply leads by telling.
Ooh, 3 to 10 times more effective by leading with questions. Bob, where is this stat from? That is fantastic.
Oh, Phil, you know I like to ask questions. Let me illustrate how this is true by asking you first a silly question, and then I have a serious question. But here's the silly question. Phil, imagine you're in a rowboat, a big rowboat with your team. We'll say there's at least 9 on your team, you and 9 others. And there's oars for every one of them. And you want to get that rowboat across the lake as quick as possible. How many of them would you like to have row with you?
All of them, of course.
Yeah, I told you it's a silly question. But here's where I'm going. Now that same team, they're no longer in the rowboat. They're gathered around your conference table. And Phil, there's an opportunity on your table. Now listen to my question carefully. If you're a leader, like I used to be, who thinks your job is to figure out the way forward, then to tell them what to do, and then their job is to do it, how many mental oars are in the water trying to figure out the way forward?
With 9 of us, that makes 20.
Phil, let's go back to the question. You're a leader who thinks your job is to tell them what to do, and their job is to do what you tell them.
Oh, so then I've only got 2, just me.
Just you. Yes, just you. And now, just imagine again, you're a leader who leads with questions. So instead of just being that leader who tells, you lean forward, you look back and forth, at the whole table. You say, gang, here's the opportunity we have. What do you all think we might do to take advantage of this? Now, how many oars are in the water?
Now we've got 20 of us.
Yes.
Now we're all going in the right direction, or at least we're going.
Now, Phil, just again, imagine this. As you listen to their input, is it possible you might hear an idea better than anyone you'd thought of?
That is possible, Bob. Absolutely.
It's not guaranteed, but with all that brain power, it's probable. And so let's just say across the table is an outstanding woman on your team. Her name is Sally, and Sally shares an idea, and you think, wow, that's so much better than anything I was thinking. So you lean forward, you say, Sally, I love your idea. In fact, Sally, would you be willing to lead our team in executing on your idea? How hard will Sally work?
As hard as she can, maybe harder.
Yeah, whose idea is it?
Yeah, not mine. It's hers.
Yeah, she's going to own it and make it work. Well, Phil, that's some of the reasoning on why a leader who leads with questions, first of all, they're hearing better ideas. Second, Phil, in general, do you like to be told what to do?
Absolutely never.
No, yeah, exactly. And so when you've had a leader say, hey, Phil, what do you think we ought to do? And then says, love your idea. Let's go with that. Wow. In fact, Phil, just the fact that your boss asked you, hey, what do you think we might do? How did just that make you feel?
Valued and loved. If you listen to me, you clearly have some respect for me.
Without your boss saying, hey, Phil, I think you have a lot to offer. I value your input. Just the fact that they asked and listened communicated that. Well, those are all the reasons that the best advice I've received is a leader who leads with questions will be 3 to 10 times more effective than a leader who just simply is like I used to be. I have when I speak, I share a confession. I start with, for most of my career, I was a benevolent dictator. And it wasn't out of evil intent. It was that my only paradigm of leadership is that it's a leader's job to tell staff what to do, to give them direction. And I did say benevolent. I grew up in a home where I was taught to say please and thank you. So, Phil, if you had been on my team, I don't think I'd ever would have said, Phil, go do this. It'd been more like, hey, Phil, this week we're working on this. It'd really be great if you could please do this. And when you did it, Phil, I would have said thank you. And in fact, at a staff meeting, Phil, you stand up. You all need to hear what Phil did. And I don't want to suggest we got nothing done, but yeah, I was a benevolent dictator until 2006 when I found the book called Leading with Questions. You know, this new book is the third edition, but Dr. Marquardt published or wrote the first two. When I found his first edition, I did not know Dr. Michael Marquardt, but his book changed my leadership forever and actually set me on a new path.
So how did you find the book? Did somebody give it to you that this is something you need, or did you pick it up at the airport, or how did this book come to you?
You know, you're in Orlando. You might even remember this place. Across from the Florida Mall, back in 2006, there was a Borders bookstore. Of course, Borders is going out of business. Our headquarters is in Orlando. My wife was with me. She loves to go to bookstores. She goes all over the bookstore. When she's done, she knows she will find me still in the leadership section. And my habit is to find, 3 to 5 books I've never seen before, pull them off, peruse them, see if any of them are going home. Well, in 2006, I discovered the first edition of Leading with Questions, perused a few pages, said, this one's going home. And, I love books. I eat books for breakfast. And you get something out of every one. But I had no idea that one would change my leadership forever and set me on a new path. So found it in a Borders bookstore in Orlando.
That's so interesting. So would you believe that the Florida Mall is no more, Bob?
No.
Yeah, now it is now Deezerland. There's a museum there. There's a lot of different stuff. But my favorite part is there's the pinball palaces there. So I play pinball there.
Wow. That is cool.
Yeah.
No, I did not know that, Phil.
Yep. So I've only been here a few years, so I never got to experience that Borders bookstore, but I remember Borders in downtown Milwaukee very well. On the river, beautiful spot. I picked up lots of books as well. So, Bob, I have to ask you, I know you love books. When we talked before, right, that was a bonding moment for us. Tell me how you read a book, Bob.
Well, that's a great question. I don't have just one way, but let's go back to when I'm in a bookstore. Today it'd be Barnes and
Yeah.
Noble. Pull them off. The first thing I do, well, first of all, the title's got to grab me. The second thing is look at the table of contents. And kind of in the table of contents, you can quickly see the direction the book is going. And at that point, I'm evaluating because, I've got limited time in the bookstore. I'm evaluating, does this table of contents kind of grab me? Now, let's say there's a particular chapter. They say, hey, this is interesting. I'll then go to that chapter and read kind of the first page, because usually the first page kind of gives you the thesis of where that chapter is going. And, at this point, I'm making the decision whether to buy or not buy. So that's the reading of the book at the bookstore.
Cool.
Then in getting home, and, in other words, I bought this one, I'm taking it home. I always read with a pen in hand to underline, circle. I'll dog ear pages like, okay, this is one I want to get back to, put an X up there, that kind of thing. But I won't necessarily read the book cover to cover. I'm again picking out that chapter and thesis and just kind of seeing where it's going. I'm also, because Phil, like you, I'm a speaker, I'm a teacher. And so I'm also always looking for a nugget. I'm looking for a quote. I'm looking for, hey, I've never thought of it that way before. And those kind of things. So in that way, I may read a book a bit unusually. And again, I can get a lot out of a book without reading it cover to cover is what I'm trying to say. And time is, we all have a shortage of it. And occasionally there will be books, though, that I will devour cover to cover then.
Absolutely. No, that's great. I love that. And I love actually that you said that it's from someone you haven't heard of. So an idea from somewhere different than you're normally looking. Because I think that is, for me anyway, that's the hallmark of a great leader. The person who isn't always contributing, often the quietest one, has a nugget to share that if we can just light them up just a little bit more, we're going to get a whole lot of great value out of them. Is that what you found too, Bob?
Absolutely, Phil. Absolutely.
Awesome. So with that, with that, you talk about in the book, which I love, by the way. I've only read the third edition, so I've only got your book here. So with that, you talk about a culture of questioning, and I think that's different than how a lot of people think about questioning. They think, okay, I want the 10 questions that I need to ask to be a better leader. But that's not where you're going here. You're talking about a culture of questioning. What does that mean, Bob, and how do we get that?
Um, it can mean various things. One aspect, in other words, let me state it this way: rather than defining it, it can mean all the above, is what I'm trying to say. Um, and it's a culture where questions are encouraged. In other words, where staff, like one of the things I shared in my previous book, now that's a great question, is question storming. We're familiar with brainstorming, but let's say there's an opportunity on the table. And instead of just brainstorming how we could take advantage of it, question storming is okay, we're going to question storm until we have at least 50 questions that need to be answered in order for us to fully evaluate this opportunity. Now, once you get to 50 on the table, then you do a little voting. What are everybody has a chance to put a check beside the 10 that they think are most important. So now you get by the time you're done with that, and yes, this takes some time, but now you get to the point of, okay, here's the questions that most of us think or the majority thought. And then rather than assuming anyone can just answer it, it's like, okay, we've got, the top 5 here. Who will take responsibility for doing the homework on question 1, on question 2, question 3? We'll meet back. And what you're doing there, though, is, yes, that's an exercise, but done over time, staff know that it's fair to ask a question about something. In other words, the fact there's an opportunity, the first thing is, well, we just got to do this. No, we're going to evaluate. And then even if we decide to do it, how do we do it intelligently? And that kind of thing. Second part of the culture is that the leader is asking questions. And, I say, Phil, that it is a heavy, heavy burden on the shoulders of any leader who thinks their job is to have all the answers. I know because I was once that leader. Phil, guess what I was tempted to do when I was asked a question that I didn't know the answer for?
Make it up.
Yes. And I had great staff. I think at times they must have known. I don't think Bob really knew. I think he just made that up. And rather than nail me, which they should have, they never did. But when I realized, no, great leaders, they don't need all the answers. They just need some of the questions. And so, again, when a great leader is asked a question they don't know the answer for, they say, hey, Phil, that's a fantastic question. I don't know the answer to that. What do you think the answer might be? Phil may have an answer, or Phil may say, well, Bob, that's why I came to you. I don't know the answer. Well, Phil, that is a great question. Where could we go to find out the answer? And Phil says, well, man, I could do a Google search on it. Phil, would you? Because you've asked a great question. When you do that Google research, will you come back and share with me what you think, you discover? And in that way, by just having those couple of questions ready, I'm ready for anything I'm ever asked because I no longer feel the burden that I've got to have the answer. The great leaders don't have all the answers. They have just some of the questions ready.
Wow. Well, I love that you said some of the questions because that's encouraging. I'm never going to memorize. So if this book, and it's not, by the way, but if it was filled with 1,001 questions, I would feel like, okay, this question here, how else can we think about this? That's the magic question. And if I can only remember that one, then I'm gonna, then I'm gonna hit a home run. In reality, there's only some, and that is the willingness to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, and I need some help finding the answer out. Am I
Yeah.
am I getting this right, Bob?
Phil, yes, you are. Whenever I speak, at some point in my presentation, I say, who here would like to learn to lead with questions in 30 seconds? Every hand in the audience goes up. And I pick a member. Well, today, Phil, you're my audience, so I'm going to pick you. And I say, Phil, come on up here. And as you're coming up, I say to the audience, I pick Phil because I think he has a photographic memory. He's only going to have to hear my 4 favorite questions once, and he'll have them memorized. And let's see if this will work. And I say, now, Phil, here's what we're going to do. I've got a second hand on my watch, so I'm going to be the timekeeper, but I'm going to share my 4 favorite questions. As soon as I'm done, I'm going to say, Phil, do you have them memorized? And if you say yes, I'm going to say, share them with us. And so the clock starts when I start the first question. The clock ends when you effectively share the 4th question. So, Phil, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Phil, my first favorite question is, what do you think? Second, what else? Third, what else? Fourth, what else? Phil, do you have them memorized?
I do.
Share them with us.
So, what do you think? What else? What else? And what else?
Oh, Phil, I've got to change that question to who here would like to learn to lead with questions in 18 seconds? Now, some people listening may be just a little skeptical, like, Bob, you can't ask somebody, what do you think? What else? What else? What else? And I said, well, not in that rapid fashion, but imagine a conversation. And so, Phil, there's an opportunity on the table and say, Phil, here's what we're looking at. Phil, what do you think we might do? In other words, what do you think is going to then tie to the topic? And research shows that when you're asked, hey, what do you think? You will give an initial answer. And something you'll do instinctively is you'll roll out kind of a safe answer to test the waters. And so, Phil, if I ask Phil, hey, what do you think about it? And Phil, you give me that first answer, and I then say, well, Phil, that's stupid. Everyone knows that. You're sorry you answered. Next time I ask, I'm going to get nothing. But when I say, wow, Phil, that's really good. Well, what else? Well, Phil relaxes a little bit and thinks, wow, this Bob guy's pretty smart. He understands my wisdom. He wants more of it, and you'll give me more. And again, at some point you'll pause. And instead of moving on, I may grab a pen and say, Phil, I've got to take notes. This is so good. Please say more about that. In other words, other ways to say what else could be, hey, please say more about that. And you will. And what I've discovered is actually the 3rd and 4th question that gets to your gold nugget, your very best thought. And once I realized this, Phil, I realized I many times had, even when I asked a question, I was like that proverbial gold miner, mined all his life for the gold vein, never found it, quit. Somebody comes along later and says he was within 6 inches. Well, if you only ask, hey, what do you think? And when they give that initial answer, you move on. Well, you got close, but you got to dig a little deeper to get to their gold nugget. And that comes on the 3rd and 4th question. And Phil, as you said, if leading with questions requires memorizing a whole bunch of long, complicated questions, it's like, I'm out. But imagine a leader who's only been a teller in their next meeting, either one-on-one or with their team around the conference table, just using these 4 questions. Hey, gang, what do you think we might do here? And then listen, say, wow, what else? Say more about that. What's another idea? You will have moved from being that benevolent dictator to that one who leads with questions with just these 4 questions. And sure, there's more questions you can ask. But, Phil, we haven't talked about this, but I grew up on a farm in South Dakota. I share that to say I like low-hanging fruit. And what I love about leading with questions is so many of the best questions are so simple. They're not long, complicated kinds of things.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Well, yeah, I grew up on a in northern Wisconsin. My dad was a dairy farmer, so
Ah,
we have some of that in
we
common as
do.
well, Bob.
We do.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I think back to when I was first leading teams, and I can tell you that I did my best, like you, to be benevolent, but certainly more dictatorial than I am now. I didn't ask as many questions as I should have. But with that, when I finally realized that, it took time. It wasn't the first time that I asked that question. I think my team was afraid that I was either going to steal their idea or that I was going to rip their face off for giving the wrong answer. So is that normal, or is it just me?
Oh, Phil, I think that's very normal. In fact, a story, because you live in Orlando, right near where you live, at Walt Disney World. A couple of years ago, we took one of our leadership development groups that we were developing, and we took them on the behind the scenes leadership tour at Walt Disney World.
Wow.
And when I got there that morning, I knew that we were going to go on the underground in the Magic Kingdom. It's like, wow, that'll be great. I knew we were also going to go to where all the cast members come at Epcot to change into their costumes. And but as we got on the bus, they said, "Hey, the first stop is going to be the Walt Disney Laundry Services." And I thought, really? I hope this is short. I mean, that didn't sound interesting to me. Uh, Getting to the underground at the Magic Kingdom, that was going to be fun, but turned out the first stop was the best stop of the day. And the whole day was great. But when we got there, they explained or shared that they at one time had a turnover rate of 85% a year at Walt Disney Laundry Services. They said we were doing such a poor job, we were considering outsourcing all the laundry services. And then we got a new leadership team, and the new leadership team uh, began to ask the staff. Of course, at Walt Disney World, everyone's a cast member. Even if you work in Walt Disney Laundry Services, begin to ask the cast members, what could we do to make your job easier? And what ideas do you have that would allow us to serve our guests? Everyone that goes to Walt Disney World is a guest. And they said it took about 6 months of asking before staff began to respond. At first, they thought it was a trick, just kind of like you were implying or inferring it could be. They thought, well, if we say we'll get fired. But when they began to talk, in other words, it took really building relationship and trust. The things they asked for, first of all, to make their job easier, were like not only simple, but common sense. They said, it's hot here. You would understand that. And especially in laundry service, is there any way that each of us could have an air conditioner vent blowing right over our head? Second request was, we're folding stuff here. And some of us are tall and some of us are short, and a few people, the table's the exact right height. But to have to lean over, or, is there any way these tables could be adjustable so all of us could fold at the right height? Well, it didn't take management like, yeah, we'll figure that out. And and then they had other ideas like, could we ever go follow a maid for a day? In other words, we're loading all these carts to, do what the maid does to get a room ready or to, change everything. But we've actually never seen the carts in use. Could we go spend a day following a maid around? Well, like, sure. Well, guess what? When they did that, they saw better ways to put the cart together, make it easier. And long story short, today, Walt Disney World Laundry Services has turnover of less than 5% a year.
Wow.
Staff come and stay and retire, all because management started at one time to ask, what could we do to make your job easier? But it took 6 months of building that relationship before the staff there trusted that it wasn't a trick.
Wow. That is powerful stuff, right? That's quite a change from 85 to 5. That's the kind of engagement and retention that we can only dream of. So, Bob, obviously people should get the book. Go to leadingwithquestions.com, learn more. But Bob, if people want to get started leading with questions, can you give us one or two additional magic questions that we should be asking to get started on the leading with questions journey, please?
Well, here's another three that you'll have memorized as soon as you hear them. But the backstory here is when Captain Michael D. Abersoff took over, he's a Navy commander. When he took over command of the USS Binfold, one of our nation's most modern warships, morale on that ship was the lowest of all. I think we have 300 ships in the U.S. Navy. However they measure morale on that ship was the lowest of all. 18 months later, under his command, retest morale went to the highest of all ships in the Navy. Well, the first thing Commander Abersoff did upon taking command is he set up 300 15-minute meetings with 300 sailors on that ship, one-on-one. And in those meetings, he asked them three questions. And Phil, you'll have these memorized upon hearing them one time. And they're, again, as I shared, some of the greatest questions are so simple. What he asked the sailors each in these meetings was, what do you like best about our ship? Second, what do you like least? Third, what would you change if you could? And of course, he then listened. Now, Captain Abersoff did not promise to make every change he heard. And at the end of the first day, he might have only met with 10 or 15 sailors. He had a whole bunch of these 15-minute meetings to go. But at the end of the first day, there was a buzz on the ship. The new captain's different. He actually is asking us for input. And then, Phil, guess who Captain Abersoff gave credit to when he began to announce changes?
The team, all the sailors.
Yeah, he named sailors by name. Imagine you're a brand new sailor. You're out on your first cruise and you share an idea, and there's the captain with the whole ship saying, Phil gave me this idea. We're going to use it. Thank you, Phil. And when you just hear that he asked, listened, and then begin to actually implement, again, not everything, but, and I'm sure in his own head, he heard a lot of things. It was like, what? What do you mean that's not being done? Well, rather than just stating, okay, I, the captain, is going to make this change, he said, Phil gave me a great idea. We're going to implement what Phil shared. And morale went up. Well, those, again, are three of my favorite questions. If we have time, I have another four.
Ooh, yeah, let's get four more. I want to remind folks, though, if you want to get to know more from Bob and you want to learn more from Bob Tiede, go to leadingwithquestions.com. You can get a copy of the book and you can read, because he is such a giving guy. He is collecting questions and answers and stories from other leaders so that you can read them on leadingwithquestions.com. So, Bob, four more questions. Hit us. Take us home.
Well, Phil, these come from a consultant who said he made a handsome six-figure income. And he said, Bob, I only asked four questions. And he said, Bob, I'm not a subject matter expert. They don't bring me in because I have expertise in a certain area. He said, in fact, I could consult with the head of an airline company day one, the head of a software developer company day three, the head of a pharmaceutical company on day three, and I'd ask the same questions. And I said, wow, I'd love to hear them. In fact, can I write them down? He said, I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Here they are. Now, Phil, you'll have these memorized. His first question is, what's going well? His second is, what's not? His third is, where you stuck? His fourth is, what needs to change? And Phil, he then circled the first question on my paper. Said, Bob, don't miss this first question. He said, if I start it with the second question with a new client, 8 a.m. in the morning, we're just met, and I start with, hey, what's not going well here? He said, I wouldn't get an honest answer. He said, no one wants to get naked at 8 a.m. and confess, yep, we're a bunch of losers here. So he said, I start with question one. Now, he has a whole bunch more of what else's and how'd you figure that out? And wow. He said, by the time they're done, we're done with question one of what's going well. He said, they're thinking that I'm thinking they're one of the most brilliant leaders I've ever consulted with. He said, now that sets the stage to make it safe to give me the true answer in question two. He said, to use baseball as a vernacular, he said, they're not feeling like on question two, they're confessing, yep, we're a bunch of losers here. It's kind of like, in spite of all the games we've won, in spite of all the home runs, all the runs batted in, yep, we've had a few errors. Yep, we've lost some games. And then we actually get an honest answer. And now he digs more with that. But then he says, notice I don't solve it for him. I say, where are you stuck? And again, they elaborate. What needs to change? They elaborate. They solve their own problem. And he said, at the end of the day, they write me that big check and they thank me for being a brilliant consultant. He said, it's all about asking these four questions. Well, again, I use these frequently because, again, they're farm boy simple, but also farm boy wise.
Awesome questions. Bob, thank you, my friend, for sharing all of your questions and a few answers in there as well of how we can begin to lead with questions. I love that you talk about finding out what's going well first. It's a great way to get people to share nakedly, as you mentioned, and to really find out how they can improve. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate you so much.
Phil, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.